Hello and welcome back to Better Than Adventure. I'm actually gonna store away some of the stone so that I don't run out of so that I can just pick up some of the loot over there. I said this in the last episode. I want to talk about something that I kind of find interesting in terms of like general culture stuff. And it is something which I've seen people describe as like, you know, the battle between the normie and the outsider. But it's very much not that and very much way more complicated. So to start off, conceptually, this is a battle between, like, two kinds of mentalities of everything. Instead of using the term normie and outsider, I'm just gonna use, like, the terms somebody who consumes things, you know, what we're actually discussing is somebody who, like, consumes things from a social perspective and somebody who consumes things from a personal perspective. I know that, you know, consuming media, some people have a problem with that. I'm just gonna use it for the sake of, like, you know, people knowing what the term means. So the idea of, like, you know, doing the popular thing is, like, you know, the herd mentality can often be quite good for you. Historically, it's been quite good for you. In so many contexts, the popular thing has, you know, in terms of media consumption, often been, alright, sure, maybe you're not gonna get, you know, in terms of, like, you know, tech, the most popular thing may not maybe be the best thing, but you're still gonna have a decent experience. Similarly, you know, most of the time, if you check what the most popular games are, what the most popular movies are, music, etc., even if you yourself, as somebody who, you know, is a benefactor of the arts, even if you may scoff at it, it's oftentimes, even if it may seem mediocre to you, it's not actually bad, like, in the sense that, like, most people would assume it's shit. Because whenever something truly bad happens, you know, some bad... Okay, granted, some things people do, like, because they're bad, you know, but, like, generally speaking, people aren't here, like, you know, nobody's gonna sing the praises of God's Not Dead, or whatever the fuck. People are gonna sing the praises of, like, things that may be mediocre but people love, because to them, they genuinely love it. And that's sort of the crux of the issue in how you perceive art, right? The real issue is that, like, to the... And I don't like using the term normie because it makes me feel like a bit of a Redditor, but to somebody who consumes media purely from a social lens, to them, like, something being popular is as important as something being good. Because media, to, like, this type of person, is just another way for them to socialize. That is basically... Oh yeah, also, I think I'm gonna make this one... I'll build it up 6, and then I'll see if maybe another 8 would be good. But yeah, that's kind of, that's kind of the thing. The sort of normie versus non-normie thing, it's oftentimes in real life, outside of the, like, frog side of the internet, you know? It's not really normie versus, you know, it's very much a how you consume media. Not to dwell on this too much, but the end result of this is going to basically be, you know, it's not pretty, what I'm trying to explain, because really it's, maybe a little bit depressing. Basically, okay, let me, I know I'm like, if I was making a video on this, it would be a little bit different, but here's the thing, right? There are a lot of people who, as I said earlier, consume media only because, you know, it's the social thing. Because the thing is, you know, nobody likes being bored, and people want to be entertained. And because of that, people will, you know, wanna... Also, I'm switching to 2 high for now, so that the next one can just be 3 high, because then I don't have to drop down to place down the glass. whenever there's like you know, the zeitgeist thingy happening, you know, people will wonder like from the outside group, right? Like, how is this popular? Why is this popular? What has made this thing, which to me doesn't seem very interesting, popular? And the answer is that other people talk about it. You yourself may have loaded up games like League of Legends not because you care about the game, but purely because your friends are playing it. There have been numerous these so-called normie games, quote-unquote, as some people deride them as, that I have personally only ever played with friends and then never touched them on my own. Back when I was in high school, I would have played a decent chunk of Clash Royale, not because I actually liked the battles, not because I ever did the main sort of, like, battling versus other players, gaining trophies, I think it was. I don't even remember. No. I played Clash Royale for one reason, and one reason only. And it's to do friendly battles with my friends. That was it. Oh, sometimes we did a 2v2 friendly battle. And that was the extent of my playtime. When I was playing Brawl Stars, similarly, I never played on my own. I only ever played with my friends. Because that's what we wanted to do. Well, Brawl Stars is different because I played that with, like, my friend group, like, a few months ago. So I'm sorry, I don't know anything about the game. And similarly to League of Legends, I have not even made an account with, actually, I don't think I have my actual username on any of these accounts. I think the Clash Royale account is called Freddy Fazbear 69. I've never played League on my own. I've only played it in, like, you know, a group of 3 or 4 friends, where we almost exclusively played ARAM, and I've played it 3 times so far, like 3 sessions, because on my own, I have no interest to play it. But when I'm with my friends, we'll play whatever seems fun for us to play. And since, you know, you can't really go across country lines every fucking weekend to, you know, play fucking insert party game here, you know? Fucking, you know, sure, whatever, we'll play a bit of that, we'll, like, load up TF2, etc., etc. And that's sort of the thing. That's also how you should behave. You shouldn't act like, you shouldn't scoff at this sort of stuff. I've already been kicked out for no fucking reason by Vanguard once, and I really hate the fucking launcher. Anyways, and what's funny is I specifically installed the game on my laptop, which doesn't have anything even remotely classifiable as weird on it. Still caused me issues. Hooray. Shit, this should be... No, it's fine. Anyways, why am I explaining this to you now? Well, because as you can probably tell from my own experience, as I mentioned, I only play these games because my friends play them. This is how most people play games. What I've described to you is basically the whole reason why some games stay popular. What are your friends playing? Well, I'll try some of that. And while very obviously, you know, I've obviously done that. I wouldn't have played Drakengard, probably, if my friend didn't recommend it to me. You know, it's very friend group dependent, and in this case, a lot of these more, like, normal friend groups are obviously gonna play whatever the popular game is, because chances are it's not bad. Oh, if I'm gonna say one thing, I'm gonna say I do like the submarine guy with the big anchor. I like weapons that are big anchors in general. I find them kind of silly. But just generally, I feel like, I know how rage-inducing it is whenever you get grappled in a game by an opponent, and then pulled towards them. And knowing I'm probably raising somebody's blood pressure is always fun. Anyways, the issue we run in when we are discussing this sort of stuff is that very often people will try to moralize stuff, and maybe I should have started with this, right? Because people try to moralize stuff, talk about societal ills. I'm not stupid. I don't think this is a societal ill. This is just a way a lot of people perceive, you know, art and stuff. So to continue on with, like, you know, this, the issue doesn't start with the way, like, they enjoy stuff. No, it's a bit more complicated. Specifically, you ever notice, like, whenever people get confused as to why you like something that doesn't have a fandom? It's happened to me quite a few times, because a lot of the games I like, if we'll be real here, aren't popular in the fucking slightest. Fucking Panzer Dragoon Saga. How many people have heard of it? And it's one of my favorite games of all time. Is there a fandom for many of the other games I like? Maybe. Probably not to the same extent. Fucking... even if I do, I wouldn't call it the best game ever. I liked Terracan, and I was definitely, mesmerized by Germs Naraware Tamachi, even though, calling that game good would, result in... I can't say I don't like it. I have to say, like, you know, it's bad on a, would I recommend it to somebody? Like, no, don't complete the game, it sucks. But goddamn, it is interesting. And this is sort of where the problem begins in the story. Did I forget to... This is sort of where the problem begins in our story, because for a lot of people, that is sort of where it starts and where it ends. I personally enjoyed Germs for what I played of it. I know the entire game is, like, miserable to complete, but, I had fun in the sections I played. Surely that counts for something. The issue I find in the sort of way people engage with this stuff is specifically that fandom thing, right? Because to a lot of people, a dead fandom is obviously going to destroy their enjoyment of a game for the simple reason that they have grown, for a variety of socially induced reasons, to look at gaming as a social hobby. And so because of that, that's why multiplayer games are so popular, but also why, like, the strongest single-player games can often be more about the fandom themselves than the games. Like Five Nights at Freddy's. Who's actually played a FNAF game? Fucking nobody. Everybody's in it for the community, which is a very funny thing to say, but genuinely, that's how people engage with it. That's the only way I've engaged with it, because I understand that there's no way I'm fucking playing that shit. And this goes for other games as well. What the fuck happened here? Why didn't I notice this? With Deltarune, for instance, right? Or Undertale. And Toby Fox stuff in general, right? A decent chunk of the fan base either hasn't played the game, or if they have, they haven't played it to enjoy the story themselves, see where it leads, that sort of stuff. No, they've played it so they can, you know, discuss it with their friends. And obviously there's nothing wrong with discussing something what you love, that's what you should do. The thing is, they were specifically interested in it because of that, rather than, you know what, I'll extend it up by... Yeah, oof. What did I do? Okay, there we go. I'll go up 8. Because I intend to only make this like an 8, and then maybe a 6, we'll see. You know, they were only interested in it, not because they were, you know, in love with Toby Fox's work, but because they thought the game was interesting enough, plus they loved the idea of having something to really discuss with other people. That is why people get hyped. And that's sort of where this discussion leads, right? Things stop really being about something's inherent quality, and the debates between something's, you know, inherent quality stop really mattering. Why would I want to argue over if some old game that nobody really cares about anymore, except a few weirdos on the internet, you know, why would I want to argue over if it was actually good or not? Why would I do that when instead I can just, discuss something popular? Because in a sense, that's the thing. A game's popularity, a game's quality stops being about, like, an intellectual discussion of its intricacies and starts being more about the hype cycle. Because, that's what kind of matters a lot. People talk about the Nintendo Wii often, not by, oh, the Nintendo Wii was like this, it was like that, people won't talk about this, people talk about the hype moments, the aura of the generation, Oh yeah, sure, dude. Fucking the 360? Yeah, you know how fucking badass it was when Halo dropped? We were outside, lining up, from midnight onwards so that we could, be the first guy to buy the game when it releases physically. That is, like, what people really love discussing. And I'm gonna be real with you. That is a huge part of, like, the zeitgeist. That is something that is really cool to look back on, because it genuinely was a huge part of the system's identity. However, not the entire part. And I feel like the big issue in, like, the debate between the normie and the outsider is that a lot of the time, while the outsider is correct on the sense that people are focusing on, the zeitgeist and the community way more than on the actual games and on the actual intrinsic values of that sort of stuff, the, like, outsider tends to forget that these things also matter. And so, like, at the end of the day, it's the meme. You have the thesis, and you have the antithesis. From that, a synthesis is born. The thesis is that, a game is, the thesis is basically like, the normies, they're going to, they are, like, the way they engage with art isn't really, based on its value. It's, like, based on its hype, and that will devalue gaming on its whole, blah, 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 blah. And then, from that, we have the antithesis, which says no, they are simply engaging with art in, one of the ways which matters, because everything is social. Humans are social creatures, in fact. And of course, from that, the synthesis is, the end goal is that you should be engaging with art, both in the way the normies do it, and in the way the outsiders do it. When discussing, and this is something I feel like, shockingly, a lot of video essayists, like, when they talk about games, have done really well. Whenever people talk about, like, oh yeah, the video essayist, dude, I've seen so many videos where somebody, like, discusses a game, and obviously discusses the game, but also, like, discusses a lot of the stuff related to the game, like, the community, the hype. All of that matters when you're discussing a thing, Obviously, And the thing is, right, you're gonna be asking yourself if you like to watch a lot of video essays, right? Like, especially in gaming, you're gonna be wondering, like, okay, well, who really discusses only the hype of games instead of, like, their actual, internal value or whatever? To which I say, you probably haven't watched a lot of, like, things outside of your bubble. Because I'm gonna be real with you, like, for instance, I myself have never used TikTok. I sometimes have to open up links of TikTok on my computer, and it's a wretched website with a wretched UI that keep it away from me. On YouTube, I have an extension which automatically hides shorts because I don't want to see them. I don't care. I have managed to isolate myself from a lot of the, like, quote-unquote normie stuff, in the sense that, like, I don't see the TikToks where people discuss Resident Evil. I don't see that sort of stuff. So, to somebody, and this is a part of the reason why, for instance, when there was that whole debate where people are arguing over, can you be a fan of Resident Evil if you've never played a single Resident Evil game and you don't intend to play a single Resident Evil game? That is why that hit me and many others with a truck. It is because, to us, the concept of that, like, just the idea of somebody saying, you know, you can enjoy you can enjoy a piece of art, just never, without ever coming in contact with it, purely by, consuming media based on it. To us, that sounds fucking insane. They're like, no, of course, no, that. Wait, but to, the people who are saying that, the communities therein have this as the default. They have it as the normal. To them, we are the, and in many ways, like, the people who actually care about this sort of stuff, care about, the sanctity of art or whatever, whatever LARPy way you would want to put it in, we are the minority. And that's sort of the thing, That's why it's so important to, have this sort of, pushback. Because I feel like, without the pushback, media gets worse. It is kind of interesting, though, right? Like, I don't remember which scene this was. It was some scene from it's either Seinfeld or Big Bang Theory, all of them look the same to me, I'm sorry. Where, like, there was a joke in there, where one of the nerd characters was like, oh my god, this is like the Thundercats and Transformers combined, something like that. And that was the joke, that was the funny. Now, to you and me, this doesn't sound funny. Where's the joke in that? What is the funny here? The funny is that he's a fucking weirdo for caring about media. And obviously, what's funny is that partially because of how nerd culture has expanded thanks to the internet, this kind of joke feels like, not even a joke. There's nothing funny here. It's one of those jokes which are just completely, like, so out of style that they don't really pass as even jokes anymore. Like, you'll say them and people look at you like you just said something, like you said some random non sequitur that had nothing to do with anything. That's good. One really great thing with, like, the previous generations of gaming, that is, I would argue 5th and 6th did this sort of the best, was the fact that they pushed so many gamers out of the comfort zone. Like, okay, this may sound weird to a lot of younger gamers today, but back in those days, the normie games, quote-unquote, were games like Metal Gear Solid, Final Fantasy, or Resident Evil. Those were the games that often were played by what you would now call a normie. Why were normies playing some games which are, from a modern perspective, so obviously, hardcore? Well, because they were being pushed to do it. Culturally, gaming always was about the nerd, and then the 2000s happened. And the 2000s was so disastrous because they were the sort of, it's where a lot of gaming lost the nerd and started going after the, I don't want to say the jock, because it's not even the jock. The jock never cared about video games and never will. They started pandering to, like, just the loser. Who, in this case, that there was a really good video by Kadikarus on, like, the UK PlayStation magazine, and something which I really loved in that video is he specifically focused on how in the 2000s it just got more and more, like, disgustingly raunchy, got more, like, and more sleazy. It was just getting grosser and grosser and grosser, because it kept trying to appeal to, like, a demographic of gamers who were just fucking disgusting. You know, oh yeah, dude, this is a gaming mag. Let's add a rent, let's add like rate a girlfriend where you send in a picture and we'll comment on this random woman's body. That was a real thing which happened. Like this is how far. Oh, by the way, well, that's good. That's that's fucking screenshot worthy again. But yeah, like the issue we're running into within the gaming space is that slowly, and this has like been a consistent thing, gaming has never been for one group of people, you know? Gaming has always been for everyone. It's just that, you know, the way people interact with gaming has changed, and the target demographic has changed, not for the games themselves as much as for who they were being pushed towards. For instance, you know, at some point in time, Metal Gear Solid was considered a game that a lot of quote-unquote, you know, normies would play. And then, Metal Gear Solid stopped being that. Because then, games like, you know, the gun and ball games got really popular. Call of Duty, etc., etc. And that's the funny thing about it, you know? The reason why these games are popular was because they were, you know, really simple to get into. And it kind of makes sense, you know, that as gaming got larger and larger, it was gonna go in this direction. And really, you know, it obviously started happening even earlier. Like, have you played any of the old Wizardry games? I haven't. I would have hated it. There are so many things that were, like, even by the PS1 era, even by the SNES era in many RPGs that were, like, smoothed over so that, you know, you could enjoy them without feeling like you're pulling teeth, that, you know, many gamers would have thought, like, you know, well, that's the fun. That's where the fun was. Why'd you remove the fun? Why is this being simplified? And that's sort of the thing, you know? A lot of the time, whenever we complain about, you know, oh yeah, this is being simplified for XYZ reasons, at some point, you have to accept things will always be simplified, and instead of arguing over any kind of simplification, we should look at places where it's actually harmful, and into places where, you know, it doesn't really matter. For instance, you know, the fucking turn-based combat that was, like, seemingly pushed away from in many games. Why? Well, because, you know, a lot of capital G gamers were convinced that it was for, you know, that it was for losers. Why would you play? Well, they would use another word, but I can't say that one on YouTube. It isn't allowed anymore. But that's sort of the thing, you know, like, it's always, and I do really mean always, sort of been a fight to get the average gamer to be interested in something, you know? There are so many games that have pushed concepts that are kind of decently pretty complicated to a normie audience who has completely been fine with learning that, as long as it was spoon-fed to them in an appropriate way. Like, Final Fantasy was a very normie RPG series for a while, with turn-based combat, specifically because it was just done really well. Like, there's a reason why Persona 5 is, like, the point the series took off in the West, is because they managed to, you know, do what many other companies haven't. Because the issue is, right, oftentimes, an RPG developer will sand off a bit too much in order to make it approachable, and lose what made the RPG special. Persona didn't do that, that's why it's popular. Final Fantasy managed not to do that for a long time. And this is, again, where we run into, like, the zeitgeist and shit, right? Because even if you are the outsider, you will still sometimes defer your opinion to game reviews. Obviously, you know, real ones know. Listening to a game reviewer? Who would ever do that? Hey, did you hear that IGN guy gave that game a score that I disagree with? How dare he? Obviously, the joke I'm trying to make is that if you really gave no value to, you know, game reviewers, you probably wouldn't care that an IGN guy gave something a bad review. But you do. And you may be wondering, why are people like this? And let me tell you, the reason is actually kind of simple. Again, it's because humans are inherently, you know, social creatures, and even for us who, you know, even for the theoretical, like, you know, person who doesn't fit in, people still want to fit in. Some people just understand that, okay, I don't fit in here. Shit. Maybe I fit in somewhere else. That is why, like, a lot of online communities are often filled with, like there's this entire... There was, like, this entire thing where, like, at some point, a lot of the times, like, some of the, like, you know, older nerd stuff was kind of externally seen as a no girls allowed sort of thing. And then these days, a lot of it can often, you know, in discussions, well, it's a creeper, that's great. A decent chunk of it is decently queer-coded for the simple reason that, well, who do you think is going to spend a lot of time online? Well, a lot of people who don't, you know, who may, for whatever reason, and for a variety of reasons, not be able to spend, you know, that time socializing normally. And while obviously a chunk of that population are people who are a little bit too, like, insane for real life, you know, the kind of guy who can't go 5 minutes without complaining about women or, like, talking about skull shapes, another huge part of that are people who are marginalized. People who, for whatever reason, just don't fit in, either because of their identity or just their interests. Like, plenty of girls only really found interest, you know, on interesting things to discuss online because, for instance, they were into video games, and, like, I know a decent chunk of girls who were put off of gaming because their parents only ever bought them, like, My Horse, which, for those who don't know, is, like, a stereotypical, like, shitty girls games that I, you know, use as an example generally, right? But, you know, and finally, you know, if a girl was actually had parents who let her play actually good games, you know, games that weren't marketed towards girls, but marketed towards... Because they're never marketed towards girls, they're marketed towards the parents of girls, because fucking marketing is the devil. And, you know, then... What happens then? It must have, like, because what you forget is that being a woman online has been miserable for, like, many years, and, it's only marginally gotten better. Like, because imagine how, first of all, how, like, stinky it would have been in real life for, like, you know, imagine, like, being a woman in the 2000s and having an interest in video games. God. Like, the amount of weird shit that... Oh, they probably jumped off from there. Like, that probably would have sucked. And then you go, like, you know, in real life, and then you would go onto the internet. Would it be much better? Probably not. And it's one of those things with, a lot of online culture, which is that unless, like, there's a significant amount of, like, let's call it hysteria, culture only goes forwards, really. Like, you know, excluding a few incidents that were swiftly dealt with, let's call them that, like, the Enlightenment has never really been rolled back in the places where it happened, like, for instance, Europe. As much as some people bemoan it, it's never been rolled back. Similarly, like, you know, it is physically, for instance, impossible to remove, like, women's suffrage in a country that is democratic. because you would have to hope, first of all, like, because, you would have to hope, like, that you could somehow get over, for instance, 55% of the vote, except, like, you're gonna have to get over 50%, and let me be real here with you, you're never gonna get most men on board on that. You would basically have to have, like, propaganda so good, it could only really exist in fiction. You would basically have to erode, like, you basically can't do that without eroding, like, voting rights in general, at which point there's no point in removing women's right to vote, when you can just remove the right to vote. And in a similar sort of sense, in many online communities, once, like, there's a specific level of acceptance towards either be it women, or be it minorities, or be it, like, queer people, once that happens, you're not rolling that back. And we've seen the success of that in, like, recent times, where oftentimes, even in places where you really wouldn't expect it, people are still gonna look at you in great confusion, and with a raised eyebrow if you talk weirdly about women. Even in spaces that are, like, not explicitly political, they're still going to be implicitly pushed towards normalcy. And the thing is, normalcy isn't actually what is quote unquote normal or current or what most people do. It is just what most people perceive as normal. That is why these days, if you go on the internet, at the very least, most people probably aren't going to be that weird about women unless you're in, like, the really stinky spaces. But, back in the day, more people honestly would have been. But it's also but also because of what people see as normal, different things have changed, Like, back in the day, right? A lot of old-timey sexism, for instance, was very much based off of the idea that you as a guy have to be some kind of chivalrous hero, in the minds of a lot of old day sexists, it was like, women have to be respected and protected, and maybe they'll sometimes be ungrateful, but oh well, you have to be the hero. A lot of modern day sexism is about how much you hate the fact that Becky doesn't want to have sex with you, and that's where it begins and ends for a lot of those people. And that's a difference, that's how things work now. And very obviously, if we would discuss which one of these is better or worse, well, that's sort of a funny thing to ask, because in a sense, it's great that the kind of, like, sexism we often see today sounds so insane that nobody is really willing to buy it. Like, even in most real-life communities, that's kind of why a lot of, like, incel shit has moved onto the internet, is because in real life, you get bullied for saying that shit. Other men will make fun of you for that. And on the internet, you'll also get bullied by other men, so you have to, like, say weird shit in your own little corner, where nobody can laugh at you for how stupid you sound. And that is, like, the end result of everything, isn't it? It can sometimes, I feel like, especially in, like, recent years for some people, especially if they're from marginalized groups, like, look bleak. But historically speaking, if there's one thing which repeats in history time and time again, it's that once a group of people has become, like, accepted, may it be, like, an ethnic group, or, like, a, some other kind of minority group, like, sexual minority, gender minority, fucking religious minority, once they get accepted, it is nigh impossible for that acceptance to be rolled back without, like, the meteors, some... Also, yeah, I'm also making this only 6 blocks tall. Like, without some, mega colossal event that completely changes everything, that is not, turning around. And even when people often may claim that they found an event in history that ended like that, oftentimes what they found instead was not in fact that, but something different. Oftentimes people will, like, find a situation where, you know, maybe a group of people, because, like, you know, before 9/11, maybe more people tolerated, like, you know, it may be more like Americans tolerated Muslims than, you know, right after, but that wouldn't have been, like, you know, that's not an example of, like, you know, people's acceptance from being rolled back. That is because, you know, people didn't accept them in the first place. They merely feigned tolerance. And, you know, that was basically, you know, that's not the same as acceptance, is it? It's also why, like, you know, we went from, you know, even today with, the US really being at war with, like, a bunch of stuff now. Obviously, you know, people in America overwhelmingly have still supported, like, for instance, Mamdani, who is, I'm, like, 97% sure, a Muslim. For the simple reason that as time has gone on, people have, you know, grown up and realized, well, wait a minute. No, that was stupid. And you can't propaganda people out of that unless they already feel those things in the first place. Another great example that I've seen recently of, you know, what I'm arguing here is transphobia in the UK. Although a lot of people at the top over there are remarkably transphobic to an extent that I could only assume is caused by them repressing feelings about themselves or them being miserable that some trans women are more beautiful than they are. At the end of the day, if you would go to Britain right now as a trans person, chances are you would experience, like, a remarkably normal, you know, existence. Obviously, shitty humans exist everywhere, right? But you would have a remarkably normal existence up until the nanosecond you ran into a TERF. Because, like, transphobia in the UK doesn't make more, like, you know, I'm gonna call it, I'll refer to it jokingly as state-mandated transphobia, right? It doesn't actually make people more transphobic. It just emboldens people who would already be transphobes, and that's the entire way it works. That's the system. That's how it functions. You don't ever actually convince more people to hate something if you tell them that it's bad. You merely convince people who are already iffy on that it sucks. And the thing is, people don't understand this, I feel, that what I'm describing right now, I'm describing it in the sense of, you know, politics, but it works the same in everything, including media. Like, for instance, take fucking the Pokemon stuff, right? Like, there have been so many YouTube videos made on how Pokemon sucks, but all of those videos aren't being, you know, positively accepted. You know, they're not turning Pokemon fans into Pokemon haters. They're turning people who either didn't care about Pokemon or people who already disliked it into people who were just, you know, repeating the same few talking points over and over again. Because that's how negativity works. It isn't necessarily, you know, aimed at the fans of a work. Whenever somebody shits on a game, it's maybe, like, you know, and obviously when I'm saying shits, I don't mean, like, you know, when there's constructive criticism. It's never about that. You know, it's always, when somebody shits on something, it's to rile up people who already agree with them. And, you know, it's the same thing in politics. Nobody actually believes, like, you know, nobody's actually being convinced by, you know, hateful rhetoric who didn't already believe it in the first place. You know, that's just how it works. And where all of this ends, and where this video will end, the moment I finish the final thing here, where all of this ends is in something which I think I've already said before, but I want to reiterate. In order to keep human civilization going forwards, there have to be some concessions made. One of those concessions is to ban lying. I believe that if you're a public figure, you should not be allowed to lie, and you should be legally held liable for any obvious lies you make in office. There have been far too many times where somebody got elected for saying bullshit and then kept saying bullshit and did nothing and made the world a worse place. You remember this little thing called Brexit? Remember this thing called there were just so many things you could list. Terrible things that have happened. Purely because of lying. And realistically, to stop lying would be to, make sure things could function. Because especially, today, where people can use AI, when people can use that sort of shit to just fake stuff. Recently, Google released and quickly pulled a AI modification tool where you could AI modify satellite imagery, which people immediately used to generate giant craters of the Google headquarters, among other things, to show how fucking dangerous this is for spreading misinformation. And that's the thing. In order to combat misinformation, there are some liberties we need to sort of, limit a little bit. And one of those is the power of lying for public officials and for people in, those kinds of political causes. Because if we don't do that, what do you think's gonna happen? Things are gonna get worse. Anyways, yeah, in the next few videos, I'm probably gonna be working on the ruse of these things, and yeah. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.